Okay, this is chapter 1 of Lord of the Flies annotation. Just so you know, this is a kind of the little annotation key that is in the first video I made on Lord of the Flies that kind of guides you into what you're looking for, the themes, the motifs, the symbols, the readings, the characterization, and finally the intertextual references. If you don't know what any of those things are, you might want to watch that video first before watching this one, just so you know what's going on, what all these things mean. So we start on the sound of the shell. All round him the long scar smashed into the jungle was a bath of heat. So this is like a metaphor, I guess. And obviously the scar represents human impact on the land, on the island. For 12 and 13, nothing to report. 14 likewise. 15 there's a couple. So I'm going to grab a bit of a better pen. And we're going to put this line here. He became conscious of the weight of clothes, kicked his shoes off fiercely and ripped off each stocking with its elastic garter in a single movement. And so you want to annotate the word tribalism, but there's also a range of things you could annotate, like it also is about clothing. This is the start of the book, of course, but they retain their clothing, not surprisingly, but as the book goes on, of course, that'll be stripped away and it will take the form of a certain amount of tribalism, replaced eventually by war paint and so on, and this kind of plots the degradation of the children as a result. Then you could see now that he might make a boxer as far as width and heaviness of shoulders went, but there was a mildness about his mouth and eyes that proclaimed no devil. So that's a nice little bit of creative writing there. So it's kind of showing the good and the bad within the boys before they jump off. We've got a little religious reading for Ralph, or a democratic reading, without having read this line exactly. It's kind of explaining why Ralph becomes leader just because he sort of looks good, really. And you might use this to comment on leadership, democracy, religion, sort of how we pick our leaders, because he's, in essence, just picked for that he looks kind of strong, sturdy and reliable. On page 16, you want to take this note here. I expect we'll want to know all their names, said the fat boy, and make a list. We ought to have a meeting. So straight away, Piggy is providing kind of the rational, scientific expectations on the boys, and he's sort of, we should get things organised and get all ready. Down here, bottom of 16, Ralph danced out into the hot air of the beach and then returned as a fighter plane with wings swept back and machine gun Piggy. So I've got here, and I'll add it in black so it's visible, this is him showing his inner child. And that's useful if you're making a psychological reading of the text. Sorry, you can barely read that. And obviously Ralph is heavily involved in the kind of leadership from here on. And so he has to grow up very quickly, I guess metaphorically, though he doesn't, of course, grow up in any realistic way. But this is kind of, there's a lot of play and sort of childishness in the first couple of chapters that is very quickly stripped away and eroded as a result. This is obviously not quotable in an essay, but you might want to draw a little box around this because it's a really good example of characterization of characterization of the island. So you could almost include the island as one of the characters. It's described often through metaphor, simile, through detailed description that I would call characterization here. Characterization usually applies to characters, of course. But this is just a really good example of that. The metaphors and similes throughout, the amount committed to the island really makes it seem like a believable character. They talk about an act of God, so if you were making a religious reading of the text, you could jump in there. Piggy says, I can't swim, I wasn't allowed, my asthma. Sucks to your asthma, so that's why I pronounce it like that. Just put a little picture of Piggy because he's him being characterized very clearly and very straight from the outset in a certain way. And then when will your dad rescue us as soon as he can? So again, they're quite young, quite childish, quite innocent at this point, and they're very hopeful of rescue as well. 20. Didn't you hear what the pilot said about the atom bomb? They're all dead. They're all dead, said Piggy, and this is an island. Nobody don't know we're here. Your dad don't know, nobody don't know. If you want, you could write negation, because there's a very interesting use of, might even be quadruple negation. So there's that many no's in there that it's very hard to actually work out what he's saying. His lips quivered and the spectacles were dimmed with mist. We may stay here till we die? Question mark. So this is kind of the opposite. This is the embodiment of fear, and the fear is brought on by the outside world, which of course is relevant at the time because he was writing amidst the Cold War, and he had lived through parts of World War II and even participated to a certain level. The embodiment 21, a conch he called it. So this is the first appearance of the democratic item or object of the conch. And then top of 22, Ralph spoke absently. And a conch, ever so expensive, which is a reference to the outside world because obviously shells don't have a great deal of worth. You could even put colonialism there because because British people going to other islands to buy expensive shells off them is an example of colonialism. So the colonial masters or rulers going over and taking things from the native cultures. Then we can use this to call the others, have a meeting. They'll come when they hear us. So this is the conch becoming the democratic item that it is. My auntie wouldn't let me blow on account of my asthma. He said you blew from down here, and he's sort of gesturing to his diaphragm, I guess, or his lower abdomen. And this is again an outside world, so he's kind of revealing his sort of history and what issues he had in the past. 24. It says on the side, in case you can't read it, a child reverted to nature or to type. So that, again, it's a chunk, so I won't go into too much detail. Anytime there's a chunk, it's not really that useful for most essay responses. Likewise here. So I'll just leave it to you. If you want to read through it and annotate it, what you'd probably want to do is shorten it down, so kind of pick a bit that was most important. But here, others half naked or more or less dressed in school uniforms. Of course, that's, clothing, tribalism, Britishness, all of those things combined together. Nothing on 26. 27, where's the man with the trumpet? There's no man with a trumpet, only me. So everyone came to see the conch like you thought they would, but they thought that they were just going to be sort of looked after by a man with a trumpet, maybe a scout leader or something like that, when in actual fact it was just a bunch of kids with a shell. So they're very disappointed, and this kind of represents part of their confusion at this point and their loss of hope. 28, then we'll have to look after ourselves. So this is a realization of what's going on and the fact that their fear is real. You could even suggest probably the beast is sort of generated at this point, but I won't go into that too much at this point to confuse you. There was a slight furtive boy whom no one knew, who kept to himself with an inner intensity of avoidance and secrecy. He muttered that his name was Roger and was silent again. So I've got the little R because that's the characterization of Roger. And then, seems to me we ought to have a chief to decide things. I ought to be the chief, said Jack with simple arrogance, because I'm chapter choirist and head boy. I can sing C sharp. So this kind of Britishness, he's relying on the things that made him important or relevant in his original setting, which just don't really cut it anymore, sadly, on the island. 31, they could be the army or hunters. They could be. Listen, everyone, I've got to have time to think things out. So this is sort of the formation of Jack's tribe, perhaps, and kind of the way things are going in that direction. And then, of course, Ralph is taking his time, he's thinking, he's being methodical, he's being democratic, he's being thoughtful. So he sort of represents a form of leadership that's more effective than what Jack might become. 32, 33, nothing to report. 34, 35, likewise, skip it. 36, 37, 38, 39, nothing really that important. And that brings us to the end. For some reason I've drawn a picture there. So there's really not too much to annotate in chapter 1, but I hope you can start to see how this is set up as to be juxtaposed with all of the other forthcoming chapters, especially the last chapter, where the Britishness is being emphasised and the inner child is being expressed throughout. And we see small rumblings of leadership taking place. If you want me to do another chapter, let me know, put it in the comments and I'll do another one. Cheers.